Good morning, everyone. Good morning again, Commissioner. Welcome again. This is your agency, your people. We are there to serve you, the EU, and the citizens and people living in the EU. It's a very special day for us because that's the 30th edition of the European Drug Report. That's also the first European Drug Report of the new EUDA, the new European Union Drugs Agency. And for me personally, this is my 23rd or 24th presentation of the report, either as a staff member, enlargement manager, head of unit, or for the 10th year as the director. And I want to seize the opportunity to say how grateful and all my admiration and consideration for the work, not only of everybody working in this agency, but also, as the chair of the management board said, everybody was made possible for us to build over the last 30 years a unique regional drug information system where we have 27 countries, plus Norway, plus Turkey, that are reporting every year following the same protocols, the same guidelines, the same standards, producing every year better, comparable, objective information. This is what has contributed to make us the strong agency and to deserve to have a new mandate, because our work is based on data, not on ideology. And as the commissioner says, fortunately, unfortunately, the political decision is not a scientific decision. So I would say, I take a metaphor for public speaking. People consider that the content matters for 10%. Everything is about the way you present. But if you are not good with the 10%, then you fail. The same for the political decision. So hence the importance of our data, the quality, but also our capacity to tailor the information for our customers. So that's something we have achieved, and that is really unique. And of course, I want to extend my thanks to the network of national focal points, our scientific committee, but also all the networks of experts and the networks of data collection that make our work possible. Because thanks to some of those complementary networks, we are capable to take the pulse of what is happening today, and not only what happened 3 or 4 years ago. And I want to address a special welcome to my peer and friend and colleague, Maya, the director of EMSA, because it's a challenge to be executive director of EU agency. And EMSA, they are doing a lot also to contribute to the work in Home Affairs. But Home Affairs people do not always know. So, Maya, I kept my promise. To describe what are the highlights, what are the challenges that we are facing and that we present in this report, I carefully chose the picture to present you an allegory of the myth of Sisyphus. And you will appreciate, I hope, this is also a better, gender, balanced revision of the allegory. Why is it? Because we have so many changes, quick changes, more local changes, not always widespread, but they are the cause behind some of the new challenges we are facing in the EU. It's the rapid drug market shifts, the increase in the intimidation, violence related to drug trafficking, but also the increased involvement of vulnerable young people everywhere in Europe. It's also what is now a current practice standard everywhere, substance use, whether it is concomitant or successive, but it's a greater challenge for prevention, but also for treatment and also for harm reduction. And then, of course, we have new substances, new risks, and new harms. Just last December, we had detected altogether 1,000 new psychoactive substances through the European Drug Information System, the early warning system. There were 1,000 substances that never appeared before on the drug market. And this is also thanks to the work of the people here and in the member states with us that we are capable to report every day, 7 days a week, almost in real time, and when needed, to assess the risk, and then to allow the EU to put those substances under control. We talk about the market. That's a very resilient market. The commissioner made some references to it. There are changes in the drug flows. There is still the highest availability we have ever seen. Everywhere, everything, everyone remains the key, three key words describing the situation. We see an increase in the production of synthetic drugs in the EU, but also the involvement or the use by criminal organization of cross-border trade for smuggling or providing equipment to create new laboratories, for smuggling drugs, but also for smuggling the chemicals, the precursors that serve to increasingly produce drugs in Europe. And in the report, we also mention the online platforms, especially the surface web, a bit less than before the darknet, but increasingly the social media. And hence, also, when the commissioner spoke about Protect Europe, a debate existing in the EU, especially in the area of justice and home affairs, is how to make sure that law enforcement can have an access to data that cannot just be encrypted and protected just for the criminal organization. But it's also about protection of personal data. It's also about democracy. And also it's about allowing the safety and security of commercial business for the customers. So it's a very complex issue. And I appreciate that this will be a long way until a solution can be found that can be useful and acceptable for all the stakeholders. We have three specific groups of substances that are changing a bit more quickly than others, or that appear to be recently more visible or problematic. One is the group of stimulants, and the commissioner mentioned rightly that there is such a huge increase in the availability of cocaine and crack. Only in 2023, there were 419 tons of cocaine that have been seized in Europe. The good news is from the most recent data, it seems it's a bit decreasing last year. We don't have yet the full picture, but also we don't know yet what it means. So we need to continue the analysis. But the huge availability of cocaine is also associated to the increase in the final step of the chemical process of production of cocaine on the territory of the EU. It's also the increase in the harms and social and health-related risks. And we noticed that the report mentioned that we have 25%, 1 in 4 overdose is when we analyze the blood samples, we find it's cocaine together with opioids. But the commissioner mentioned we have also the synthetic catechinones. We have new challenges, more amphetamines, more ecstasy being produced in the EU. And also we see an increase, as there is an increase in the production of synthetic drugs in Europe. We also see an increase in the seizures of precursors between 2022, where there were 54 tons of chemical precursors seized. In 2023, we moved from 54 to 178 tons in 1 year, showing the pressure from the market, from the producers, for law enforcement, but also for the population, because there is a huge pressure from the market to increase the customer base and to increase the average consumption from those customers. And finally, what is becoming an increasing problem is also the environmental damage, especially, but not only with the dumping sites that are found here and there in Europe, in the countries or in the regions where synthetic drugs are being produced. Then second group after the stimulants is the opioids and the synthetic opioids. Here we have new threats. First of all, because here also we find that there is an increase in police substance use that is increasing the difficulty also for the interventions, including in case of overdose, for those who have been mixing products or don't know that there were mixed products in what they are consuming. more challenges to resuscitate and keep them alive. We also know that we have tools for prevention of overdose. For instance, essentially naloxone. But we have only 15 member states out of 27 who have adopted the legislation. And more recently, there are 3 new countries that are piloting. And this is very important for me as the executive director of this agency. We have a mandate to be useful to contribute to preparedness. So we need your help, Commissioner, to tell the member states, stop discussing, act. Because for years, nobody has adopted more provisions for naloxone. If we wait until there is a new epidemic, it will be too late. So the choice of the tool, the choice of the legislation, the choice of the modalities is the competency and the responsibility of the member states. But if we want to be prepared, and if we want this agency to contribute to preparedness, we need to encourage the member states not only to be afraid about fentanyl epidemic in the US, but to take the right decision in line with their legal systems and with their political choice. We also know that fentanyls are not the main problem for those synthetic drugs here. We have another group that are the nitazines that are becoming more important the recent years, but also a small new group that are the benzimidazole or phins that have appeared in the last 2 years. We don't know that much about those substances. That's one of the things we are going to further investigate with the new network of forensic laboratories. Third group and last group for the group of substances, the cannabinoids. As people in this room know, cannabinoids, when we talk about cannabinoids, we talk about originally the substances that are contained in the plant of cannabis. But also we talk about those who are mimicking those molecules, but that are purely chemical. They act on the same receptors in the brain, but they have different effects, they have different impacts. In some cases, they are more toxic, they can kill, or they can have a more or less similar effect. But again, people don't know what they consume. We don't know what they consume. It's difficult to prevent the risk. Or also, in many cases, we see that in the cannabis or cannabinoids content product, there is an increase in the mix between vegetal origin cannabinoids and then sprayed synthetic cannabinoids, for instance. An important challenge for all of us and for our agency in particular is to support the member states that have decided to legalize cannabis use or recreational cannabis use, to help them to assess the impact, and hence even more important is the availability of strong data collection, reliable monitoring system, and we contribute to a working group to identify, to define scientifically some of the performance indicators that could be used to measure the impact of those important policy changes. And then there is a new group of cannabinoids or synthetic cannabinoids we call semi-synthetic that have appeared only 3-4 years ago. We don't know well their properties. Some of them seems to have a very, very strong impact on the young people who are using them. But what is also an interesting question mark for us is we call them semi-synthetic because they are produced from CBD. CBD is naturally contained in the plant, but then it is transformed to produce those semi-synthetic. If it was further spreading in Europe, maybe one day CBD should be considered as a precursor. We don't know yet. We need to monitor and to analyze and to observe. I'm near finishing now. We have published a few weeks ago the new SPAT, the school survey report. It's a very important school survey. The 2024 campaign was covering 37 countries. We see mixed image, mixed picture of the situation. There is a long-term decline overall. Even the percentage of cannabis consumption among the school children has reached its average lowest level, which is more or less 5.7%. But we see a variability between the countries. And what is worrying is that the gender gap that we used to observe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is narrowing, which is not good. And there are other epidemiological studies in the past that were showing that it was the same for tobacco use and also for e-vaping. And what we see is that from the school surveys, in some countries, in some places, the women's or girls' consumption of inhalants or of non-medical use of pharmaceutical products is increasing. So this picture shows that, again, it's important to have the picture at European level, but when you want or need to decide about your action locally, you need to have a better and more granular data and analysis of the data, because you need to know what is the exact behavior or what is the problem or not, talking about substance use, and there can be a big variability between even cities or regions. So the question now, as part of the new mandate of our agency, Commissioner, is, are we ready? Well, our mission and our contribution to EU preparedness, it's about contributing the EU to better anticipate, alert, respond, and learn. And for the first year of our mandate, for the new services, we focus more on strengthening our capacity to anticipate and to alert, and we pave the way to develop new products as from next year for strengthening the EU capacity to respond and then to learn from the practice, because of course the increase in the budget and the staff is progressive, at least for the staff, and we need also to invent, to elaborate, to define the new services. So, but in a nutshell, I would say that for the old opioids, we are quite well prepared. We have a reasonably good coverage, for instance, of the needs for opioid treatment, an average of 50% in Europe, but some countries have a very higher percentage, and countries that are smaller and have joined the EU a bit more recently, they have a much lower level. So still there is an effort to be made. But for instance, for the risk that in some years from now, we may have a big wave of demand for treatment for those stimulants, the reason being, we estimate that between the moment one person starts consuming for the first time cocaine and the time that person will try to enter or ask for treatment, the average estimate is 13 years. As we notice the increase in availability and consumption 7, 8 years ago, we can reasonably expect that in 4 or 5 years' time from now, there will be all this huge number of people who consume. We have indirect measurement of that, for instance, thanks to wastewater. We will need to be able to provide treatment. And there, for cocaine addiction, there is no standard treatment like cocaine substitution. Most of the treatment available, for instance, they don't address craving, while craving is the main factor for relapse for those consumers. So we need to invest in research, both for pharmaceutical research, but also for clinical protocols. And we need to train and educate teams, psychiatrists. We need to develop knowledge. And as we have a new psychiatrist working in the agency for 1 year, this is one of the top priorities for her for the next 3-4 years. So Charlotte, good luck. So just to go now to the responses, the Commissioner has mentioned the roadmap for drug trafficking, Protect EU. There is also now the discussion for preparing the new European Union drug strategy. We are launching a project to better understand this ultra-violence among the youth that are involved in some criminal activities, as it was reflected on the media, for instance, in Sweden or in southern France. We have an important project in cooperation with WHO and UNODC, which is called Scale Up, because we need to build together a better knowledge of how can we better treat people who have a problem with stimulants. For prevention, we have developed Plateau that is providing support and training on the European curriculum on prevention for decision makers. And now we have signed an agreement to transfer another program, similar content, but for the practitioners, which is called Politeia. We need to continue upscaling the services for the prevention of overdose. I already made a reference to naloxone, is not the only one. And then we have still huge challenges for developing relevant, useful, and innovative harm reduction interventions. Why? Because we still discuss, and our implicit theory is still the heroin epidemic. The problem is that as we have new substances, we have new polyconsumption, we have new risks and new harms, there is no way to just discuss about needle exchange programs, for instance, or other interventions. We need to innovate. And then, one good news, some interesting developments also in the research, clinical research. It's about the psychedelics, the use of psychedelics in therapy. We have embarked on working, exploring, understanding a bit what's happening in this area. And here, for the moment, the picture is also mixed feelings, mixed picture, because on the one hand, we can say that there is obviously there is evidence that there is a strong potential for some psychedelic-assisted therapy for some very severe psychiatric conditions, such as post-traumatic disorders, like the soldiers who came back from Afghanistan or Iraq, for instance, severe cases of depression. But the problem is that we need for more robust research, including in Europe, and hence also with the new mission of the agency to provide support and orientation to the Commission for the priorities and the funding for the research, for me, is something very important. We also have a working group with different services from the Commission for the European Medicine Agency. And one of the key issues for which, for the moment, I think we know absolutely nothing in Europe, but there are some very interesting cases of work and experience. For instance, in Germany, it's about, because this was the problem in the US mentioned by the Food and Drugs Administration last year. When we speak about psychedelic-assisted therapy, what the assessment shown that there were huge weaknesses in the US model or proposal is how do we define therapy? And what is the training required for the therapists to certify them? And this is one of the main reasons why the Food and Drugs Administration has not entirely rejected those psychedelic-assisted treatment, but they have not given their agreement. And the problem is, for the moment in Europe, in Austria, probably in Portugal, everywhere, there are offers for training of psychedelic therapists, which in fact is completely illegal, which means that those people who followed that training in good faith could be accused of illegal exercise of medicine. So they could be put to jail for that. And also, of course, there are no guarantees for those who are the clients or the patients who are volunteers to go to those programs. So there is an interest, there is a potential. We need to know more, but there are risks for the citizens. We need to make sure that we inform them well, including the national parliaments. And then one more thing is that if I want to sum up and to say where are we and what are the priorities for us, as we have shown with the first European Conference on Drug-Related Violence last year, I think the cornerstone is and should be even more the local level, the communities. And there we have both opportunities and problems. First, because of those challenges I mentioned, the violence, the intimidation, some of the problems associated, again, we have open scenes that we see in many cities in Europe. There is a tendency for the emergence of a new, extremely repressive discourse proposing to declare the war to people who are using drugs, to cut the social allowances of families who have a child that is a delinquent, like this is an ambition for the families to tell my son, when you will be a man who will become a delinquent. I don't see why we should punish on the top of that those families. They already have a vulnerability. So we need to be more holistic and avoid to become hostile. We have seen the result of hostile and the war to people using drugs in other parts of the world. It's also the need for a more inclusive and integrated interventions. And there we see we have a problem because over the last 20 years, with the successive economic crisis, there was a reduction in the budget of the state, including for social services, including for the Ministry of Health, and overall the social welfare model in the EU is suffering. And I think it has to be reinvented because also financially it is every time less sustainable. So how we are going to reinvent, how we are going to make sure that we support our vulnerable communities, for me, this is one of the key challenges for today and for the future. It's also about ensuring and guaranteeing, as it is foreseen in the Lisbon Treaty, the fundamental right for everyone, including for people who are using drugs. We need more and better harm reduction, but we need also more risk reduction for everyone. We should do everything we can to avoid that there becomes like an opposition between harm reduction that would be only for the users and then repression to protect the citizens. When we look at local level, when we analyze the problem and the risks and the harms, violence should be integrated in the analysis. And finally, one more thing, as you mentioned, this is my last launch of the European Drug Report. I would like to pay a tribute to all the professionals in Europe, working both in demand reduction and in supply reduction. Those who know me know that I never go to a member state for an official visit without meeting and visiting and listening to people from the field. And Commissioner, we have both from the police, the customs, doctors, social workers. In Europe, we have incredible potential. People who keep a motivation despite all the difficulties they face in their work. And I think in Europe, we are not enough aware of it, and we don't recognize it enough. So I kept one quote for the end to conclude. Because you remember I showed you Sisyphus. And I think we are really in a situation where we may feel like Sisyphus. And I get a lot of questions. Last 2 weeks ago was in Azores, where I was invited together with Dr. Joan Golan. And the question we got was, did we lose the war on drugs? With all those changes, is there still hope we can do something? And I think there is hope, and this is why I chose Sisyphus. And I will quote first in English for everyone, and then the genuine version in French, the quote of someone who, from that perspective, inspires me for 50 years. And I chose to finish and share this with you, is Albert Camus. Albert Camus said in 1942, the struggle itself, talking about Sisyphus, the struggle itself towards the AIDS is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. And I want to tell you that before I say in French, everybody I visit in those teams everywhere, despite the difficulties, and we were with the Belgian drug commissioner yesterday in the drug consumption room, they smile. They talk to the people. There are those on the front line who recognize what remains of a human touch in people who are sometimes so far from the rest of our society. And as French is my mother tongue, I finish with the French version, where I included one sentence of Camus few lines before. He says, je laisse Sisyphe au bas de la montagne. On retrouve toujours son fardeau. La lutte elle-même vers les sommets suffit à remplir un cœur d'homme. Il faut imaginer Sisyphe heureux. Thank you very much.